Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to attend our exhibition talk series 3. Today is our honor to have our guest speaker, Professor JEFFERY. He's the assistant professor from University of Guam, and he's also the research associate in Hong Kong Maritime Museum. Today he will give a very interesting talk to us called Treasures of the Deep, Maritime Archaeology in Hong Kong, China, and Asian Pacific. And today we will talk the things related to our exhibition from the mountain to the sea, the second part, especially on maritime archaeology in Hong Kong, and also a very important shipwreck called Nanhai, #1 shipwreck in Guangdong, Yangzhou area. And for Professor JEFFERY, I think some of us maybe know him very well. Actually, he was also the trainer for the first batch of underwater archaeologists in China. And also Professor JEFFERY also have a very, very important knowledge on maritime archaeology, especially he's also the trainer for the Hong Kong Underwater Heritage Group. So later on after his talk, if you have any questions, welcome to ask him. So let's give a big hand to Professor JEFFERY.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'd like to thank the library for the invitation as well. It's a pleasure to be back at Chinese University. Thank you also for coming here. I know it's Friday afternoon. It's a pleasure to see you come along here rather than go elsewhere. My talk, as I said, is Treasures of the Deep, it's called. It's related to a title that we used for a book that the Hong Kong Underwater Heritage Group used in their book. It's, the literal translation from the Chinese is as you see it here, Lost Pearl in Ancient Sea, but the Treasures of the Deep is, covers what we're talking about, and it's not just treasures, we're talking historical treasures. We're not talking treasures of high monetary value, as maybe it's shown here. It's certainly those treasures, but the treasures that are shown on the table that the Hong Kong Underwater Heritage Group are sorting out or cataloguing there, Qing, only 100 to 200 year old, they're equally important treasures of the deep that have come from the site, Town Island, in the Sai Kung area, which I'll talk about. So I've taught here one course back in 2013. The course was Preserving Cultural Heritage. I just relieved someone who was teaching that. I have a background in heritage conservation, heritage management in South Australia. So it's not all just about shipwrecks that my background, or maritime archaeology or underwater cultural heritage. It's about land-based heritage. And I did cover a number of sites in that course that I taught just for one semester. But as you can see here from the photograph, I did certainly bring in underwater cultural heritage and shipwrecks. I think it's all important to bring it all together into context. If we're talking about shipwrecks, they're a part of our cultural heritage. They're not just underwater cultural heritage. So I included sites that are built sites that are ruins, like the top one in Africa that I'll talk a little bit about. And the intangible heritage, the dancing that the Yapese in Micronesia use, the bottom one. And I also brought in the course 1881, the building in Tsim Sha Tsui. And I think the students were a little bit shocked that this building was actually a registered monument. I'm sure many tourists go there and just see it as a tourist, maybe just a tourist attraction, but it's one of the 200 monuments that are in Hong Kong. It actually doesn't stand out as certainly a heritage monument these days, with everything that's shown there. My background is in archaeology, maritime archaeology, and heritage management, built heritage, working with Aboriginal people in Australia. And I left Australia to start a PhD in Micronesia in 2001. And after that, or about the same time, I started doing some work here in Hong Kong. Following that sort of work, I then went off and did some work in the eastern part of Africa. And a little bit of work in China. As Sharon said, I did help with one of the first teams in 1990 of Chinese maritime archaeologists. And now I'm in Guam, which is part of Micronesia, but the Federated States is a separate country. Micronesia is a region. It's a colonial construct named for these islands, small islands, but Guam is part of that sort of regional area. So my background is in shipwrecks, it's shown there. One of the first shipwrecks that I got involved in the 1980s was the Pandora. The Pandora came looking for the mutineers from the Bounty. And it's probably one of the most famous, infamous episodes in British history. They mutinied, and the vessel, the Bounty, went off into the Pacific. Captain Bligh was set off on a longboat, but they came looking for the Bounty in 1780 in this vessel called Pandora. And that vessel, when it was trying to get back through the gap between Australia and New Guinea, it crashed into the Barrier Reef and sank. And it sank with some of these artefacts. About a third of the site has been excavated, and a lot of them are Polynesian material. In 3 months it was looking for the mutineers. It collected a huge range of Polynesian, and this is accurately datable because we know virtually the day it sank. So we know, what this material, the context of this material, the provenance of this material. There's also some blue and white transfer wear on this. This is some of the officers that travelled and was on board the Pandora that sank, and we collected, including the really nice watch over there. So also, when I was doing some work for the Hong Kong Maritime Museum on some charts, I came across this chart in a small picture of Macau. And this was a chart done by William Bligh, who was the captain of the Bounty, and him and James Cook. And James Cook is someone like Zheng He. He's the master navigator. He's regarded as the Holy Grail in terms of explorers. And so Bligh, the Pandora, the Bounty have a connection with Hong Kong. Also, you might see on occasions actually the Bounty here in Hong Kong. So this is not the real, this is a replica copy of the Bounty here, and pictured here. I think it's at Lantau, it was at Lantau when we were here before. The Bounty came into the Pacific looking for these, this fruit, the breadfruit. It's something like, in size, durian, although it doesn't taste and smell as yummy as durian. If you like durian, I actually quite like durian. But they were wanting to get the breadfruit to take back to the plantations in the Caribbean. It was seen as a cheap food for the slaves in the Caribbean. And it was during this episode of the Bounty that Fletcher Christian mutinied. And there's been 3 or 4 very famous films done on the mutiny of the Bounty. If you're interested in maritime history, go onto YouTube and have a look. There's people like Errol Flynn, very famous actors that have been involved in this film, such as the sort of prominence and importance that it's given in British, I guess, Western maritime history. So that's a connection that I have with the Pandora, the Bounty, and Hong Kong has with the Bounty. But some of the work that I've been involved in, and I just want to run through some of the work, is it has a connection. This is all treasures of the deep. It's starting to pick up some of the Chinese material that can be found all around the world, virtually. Chinese material, Chinese ceramics were exported not just to the Middle East and Africa and India, but virtually all around the world at different times. And it was certainly found in the Swahili coast. This is where I worked for a number of years, and I lived and worked there. And it's one of the few languages that I have any connection. I've been in Hong Kong for a number of years, and my Cantonese is almost zilch. You know, it's a language that I could never really get. Yet Swahili, you know, mumbo jumbo is Swahili words for hello, how are you? I mean, it's a great language. But I'm sort of digressing. I just like to emphasise I do have a language apart from English. But this Swahili coast is this strip of land that runs on the east coast of Africa, from Mogadishu, the Somalia, down along to Kenya, to down to Kilwa-Kisawani, where it says Kilwa-Kisawani. That's in Tanzania, or Tanzania, they call it sometimes, to the border of Mozambique. Sort of stops there. That was about the limit of the trade winds, or the winds that would carry ships down. And it was a very prominent trading area. A language developed. It was a mixture of Bantu, a local African language, Portuguese, English, you name it, there was other bits and pieces. Probably why I have some sort of affinity to the Swahili language, but also their culture and their religion. They've adopted the Islamic religion there. And it's really just that strip of coast along the East African coast to Kilwa-Kisawani during this time from the 9th to the 18th century. And I got involved in that through a group that I was working with, a Dutch NGO, and we were asked by UNESCO to look at sort of implementing underwater cultural heritage and developing a capacity and a program with local people there. Particularly in this town called, or this port city called Kilwa-Kisawani, which is a World Heritage listed city. It's been put on the endangered list because there's problems with it, its conservation. But one of the things, as you can see, they identified UNESCO and asked us to work on was underwater archaeology. They wanted local people to get some benefit out of this World Heritage listed city that they were living in, and they really weren't getting any benefit out of. They were getting a little bit of money from tourists, but that's not a lot of money. They also wanted to see their intangible heritage a bit more regarded in terms of what people would come and see there. So we did some capacity building for a group of African people. Many of them couldn't even swim. They were, to get in the water was a huge effort. But they were so keen that we persevered, and they persevered. And then after they got to learn to swim, we got some dive instructors, and they got into diving. And time's gone on, and then quite a few of them are now doing a few projects. As in some places in Africa, the money's quite restricted for these sorts of maybe essential type of activities. But this place, Kilwa-Kisawani, I just want to touch on this because it was really a very important port during the sort of 9th to the 19th century, and really from the 13th and 16th century. It was a port city that was really controlling the gold and ivory trade along the Swahili coast. And the other trade, the terrible trade that we see now, is slavery. It was controlling and implementing that sort of trade out of Africa. It was a city that built up to about 10,000 people. It was minted its own coins. Back in the 12th, 13th century, it was minting its own coins, the first place in sub-Saharan Africa to do so. As it says here, they had a number of rulers from the Middle East. It started with the Persian people, then Shiraz and Yemeni, and then it was sacked by the Portuguese in 1502, only for them to leave the port a few years later. And then there was a short revival by the Omanis that came there. And also they went to Zanzibar, and it was along with the French too, they revived the slave trade. It was sort of terrible trade, but that was a prominent trade I'll show an example of that in a little while. But there are Chinese ceramics. They're in the mosque. You can see at the top slide, this is the roof of a mosque. And you can see some round holes. This is where some looters have got in and prized out the Chinese and the Asian ceramics. Such was the value that people put on the Chinese ceramics that they would embellish their buildings, their religious buildings, their home buildings with these ceramics. And unfortunately, while the mosques are still there, the ceramics have gone. This area of Kilwa-Kisawani, some said that there were 80 mosques there. I think that's a bit too much, but there were a lot of mosques there for the time it was there. And here's some of the ceramics that have been prized out of those buildings. And these ones are actually in the museum, and so they're saved. But many others weren't saved and were taken off by treasure hunters, as we call them. And this is a famous map, the Periplus of the Eritrean Sea, about 2,000 years old. And you can see here, it's a map of ports, and it talks about the types of goods that merchants and traders could go to and get from these sort of port areas. And you can see down here, this place called Raptor, a famous historical city that no one's yet seemed to found. Maybe Kilwa-Kisawani was this city. A Tanzanian archaeologist has found some Roman beads. So this relates, this map relates to the Roman Greek sort of period. But he's found some Roman beads a little bit further north of Kilwa-Kisawani, but it's still an area of research, and because it dates from a couple of thousand years ago, and things have moved on. There's not a lot of evidence left there of that place Raptor, even though it is in the historical record. So my work also extended to another area a little bit further north from Kilwa-Kisawani into another place called Money Mafia. And this was the team that we'd sort of trained in Zanzibar. We were doing some work on this sort of settlement that actually sea level rise changed at that maybe about the sort of 17th, 18th century. This was a smaller port city, still associated with Money Mafia, Kilwa-Kisawani, I'm sorry. The same ruler, the same ruler that was at Kilwa-Kisawani looked after and controlled the area of port settlement and the trade around Money Mafia. We did some recording of the settlement that had disappeared, was disappearing into the sea. And you can see also some of the ceramics that you can find probably date back to 15th, 16th century, just sitting there like that. Just in the water, virtually knee deep, you can find all sorts of ceramics, Islamic ceramics and Chinese ceramics, as well as these cotton spindle whorls here. And here it doesn't show up very well, but these, some of the coins that were made in Kilwa-Kisawani can be found. There's a few on the beach there that are shown. These coins are interesting. When we first went there, you can actually see them on the beach. This is a photograph, the top one, of just the beach. These coins, they date from the 13th century. It stopped, 13th, 14th century. These are small copper coins, Islamic coins from Kilwa-Kisawani. So these are ones on the beach you can find. You can find them underwater. We also found this Tang Dynasty coin, one Chinese coin. So this is quite a bit earlier than when the Money Mafia was in existence. But these coins were used for hundreds of years. So it doesn't redate the site as such. It means that, obviously, as we know, that these coins were used for 300-400 years. So it's a very interesting site. It also has these, and I'm sorry for maybe getting off the topic a little bit, but these are quite interesting mysteries in some ways. In this sort of diagram I show here, you'll see these where I label flat stone, hexagonal stone. There's stones about a metre in diameter. One is a hexagonal stone, there's a square stone, there's a round stone. One round stone has a flat side to it and a convex side. I was told maybe they're rotary, they're quern stones. But I don't see that the square stone or the hexagonal stone would be like that. I was told by the local people that they were places where the slaves were tied. But the bottom right-hand picture is just a round stone. It's virtually round. So, I mean, it would be seen to be easily moved by, 2 or 3 slaves. Maybe a post was put through there. They're quite interesting, I find, and I do like to sort of show people that. And these are some of the small stones. The top right-hand is in Tatmun. You can see them in Taipo, you can see them in other places in Hong Kong. The bottom right is in Taiwan. And they're still using these rotary quern, the small ones in this village, Kiwakisawani. They're still using to grind coconut. So this is the type of stone I was told that these big stones were. But you wouldn't move these big stones by hand. You would move them by, say, an animal, or maybe some sort of wheel, a machine sort of moving them. But they're just not set up. They just don't look right for rotary quern stones when they're square or hexagonal or round. So a nice little mystery. And just to sort of stress, I guess, how the importance of the slave trade was. It was a terrible trade, involving 2 million people. And it was probably far greater antiquity than the Atlantic slave trade. And I was doing a little bit of research on that for a presentation. And I looked at sort of this one vessel, the General Moreau, for 3 years. These are the voyages it did in 3 years. It came from Europe and went up to Kiwakisawani. And then it took on slaves. And then for the next 3 years, it did the subsequent 10 voyages, taking slaves from Africa to the plantations in Mauritius. So you can see if one vessel in 3 years was doing all this, how many vessels were transporting how many slaves. And it says here maybe as many as nearly 400,000 slaves were involved in this sort of trade at this time. So if we try and get back into, I guess, this Asia-Pacific region, one of the catalysts for why countries, people have got involved in maritime archaeology in an ethical manner is the sort of value, is the monetary value of the Chinese ceramics. And it's the looting of those ceramics that have really caused countries to stand up and get involved and conduct ethical maritime archaeology programs, which is what has motivated the Chinese team that are now in China doing this. And one site that was a prominent site as a catalyst was the Gildermassen Dutch ship that was carrying Ming Dynasty ceramics out of China, transporting it to Europe. It sank in Indonesian waters. It was recovered by I hate to say he was an Australian, but he was an Australian, but he was also British, I've heard. An Australian-British salvager, Michael Hatcher. And he went there and excavated this material and then sold it for something like $15 to $20 million. And he also excavated this site called the Texeng. And the boat at the top of the ship is not the Texeng, it's an illustration of what the Texeng might look like. But this is some of the material, it's later Qing material, And I actually saw a program on television in Australia, saw Michael Hatcher talking to the presenter about this site, and he showed a film of how his divers were actually pushing away the human remains. The Texeng was the equivalent of the Titanic in the loss of human life. So there were human remains there scattered around. His team weren't interested in the human remains. And he was just pushing him out of the way to recover the ceramics. And this is what still goes on a little bit in Asia Pacific, is this treasure hunting and the motivation for being able to, having rich investors that can maybe get some of the ceramics that are worth maybe something. I know some of the pots that I've seen in the Palace Museum in Taiwan are $30 million. Some of you can see just on the right-hand side, that catalogue for Christie's, how beautiful, almost sort of come out of the factory. So they're in really good condition. So there's a lot of money to be made, has been, and still is a little bit of a motivation. There's something else that goes on, which I'll get into a little bit later, that is causing concern in this region. But it was this sort of treasure salvaging that was going on that caused countries like China to get involved in that. I did hear something that the Chinese government sent a group of people to the Christie's to try and buy this collection before it went on to sale. I think they took something like $20,000, and it sold for $20 million. So they had no hope to buy it. They said, well, we've got to do something else. We actually got to do our own program, get involved in it ourselves. And this is what they've done, and they've done very well. And they're a leader in maritime archaeology in the world, not just this region, but in the world these days. The other site that I mentioned the Titanic. So the Titanic and the Geldermalsen and those Chinese ceramic sites was a big catalyst for what's come out of and our present situation with the UNESCO Convention, which I'll talk about. The Titanic, as many of you know, sank with a loss of life of about 1,500 people. It's considered by many people a graveyard, a cemetery of those people. Yet when it was found, and it was found in international waters, it meant that there was no country that really had any jurisdiction about doing anything. No legal sort of jurisdiction for doing anything. And it meant people could go there if they had the technology. They could go there and recover material, and they were doing it. And it really, it got up the nose of many archaeologists and people going there looting what was essentially a graveyard, a bit like Hatcher was doing on the Texeng. So this is the sort of what was going on. I'd just like to mention, if you've got a spare $60,000 US, you can have a dive of the Titanic. Those are Russian teams that will take you there. And that's actually causing problems now too, because they're coming down and landing, with a thump on the deck, and they're causing, a breaking of the coral, not the coral, you don't get it at that depth, but the concretion that helps protect the iron steel is being broken, and it's starting up the corrosion of that. So they're causing problems too now. So this site was instrumental in the international community coming together and working out the wording for this convention. This is an international convention, this an agreement that's now seen to be the best practices on managing underwater cultural heritage sites, and all the processes that go on with that. And it's the definition of underwater cultural heritage that's used, not shipwrecks. Shipwrecks is not actually even used in the convention. So now we have a much more nuanced view and a much more holistic view about what is heritage underwater. Up until this stage, it's shipwrecks. And it's a little bit like that still, but it's changing. And this is changing. You can see here that the underwater cultural heritage sites are sites that have human existence, having a cultural, historical, or archaeological character. and have been either partially or totally submerged. They don't have to be totally submerged underwater for 100 years. It could also be material like World War II sites that are only 60, 70 years, 80 years old. If a country wants to bring this legislation or this law, or this agreement, it's not actually a legislation but agreement, to apply to World War II, it can do that. And so 61 countries have ratified it. And some of the main aims, one of the main aims, it wanted to stop commercial exploitation of sites. You might think, an archaeologist who could go and excavate a site, ethically, and puts it into a museum, and then the museum makes money out of that. That's not the sort of commercial exploitation that they want to stop. Commercial exploitation they want to stop is selling artefacts. In archaeology, we're dead against selling and splitting up the collection, even if there's thousands of similar pieces. So the Convention is very keen about doing that. And that's why there is still a little bit of a preoccupation with shipwrecks, because some of the provisions of the Convention. But it wants to also encourage public access and also encourage cooperation of countries to work together on underwater cultural heritage sites. So the Titanic was out in the deep water, the high sea, but once a country ratifies the Convention, it applies to all the waters of a country, including its territorial sea, which is really it's like a country's own land. But the Convention will apply to that. And now 61 countries have done it, and that's maybe why the territorial sea issues, some countries haven't done it, because of there being some sort of say, instead of the country itself having a say in what happens in their area. One of the other major provisions in the Convention was that implementation of in situ management was seen as the first step, meaning they wanted to protect and manage the site in situ, without it being moved. But that was just as the first step. It's like going to the doctor, and the doctor examines you. I mean, this is what would happen with an archaeologist. He examines the site. If the archaeologist, the doctor says, "Oh, we need to do some intrusive stuff, like an operation or like an excavation," an excavation is intrusive, it's destructive. We can do that, but you need to sort of go through that process of seeing what's the significance of a site. And the Arizona is an example of managing in situ without doing any excavation. Arizona was a ship that the Japanese bombed in Pearl Harbor, and it's a graveyard like the Titanic and like the Texan. We don't want diving going on there. We don't want people interfering with it. So it's managed like that, in situ, without any diving. Another site that's managed, but as an archaeological site, is this one, the Uluburun, a 3,500-year-old ship in the Mediterranean. This was assessed as having archaeological significance, and they went ahead and they've done probably one of the best archaeological excavations anywhere in the world. George Bass, who's the founder originally of Maritime Archaeology, has worked on this, spent thousands of hours meticulously recording the site. And this is what happens in underwater archaeology. Meticulously recording, we can sort of get all the information out, as just like on land archaeology. The hassle with doing underwater archaeology is that we need to be able to breathe. We need scuba tanks, we need maybe compressed air from the surface. So it's a little bit more expensive, but apart from that, there's not a lot of difference between that and land archaeology. So moving on, this is some shipwrecks that have been identified pre-sort of contact period, the ones on the left, and then post-contact period in the Asia region. And I just want to look at a few of these, not all of them. And I've actually borrowed some information from a colleague from Xiamen for this slide and some subsequent slides. The Chinese maritime archaeology really got going in the 1970s, and they've investigated over 50 shipwrecks throughout the region. They worked with the Koreans, for instance, in Shinan shipwreck there that I'll talk a bit about. They're highlighting many things now. One of the things that maritime archaeologists get fascinated with is the type of ship it is. Is it Chinese? Is it Korean? Is it, you know, from Indonesia or Java? Is it some other? And you can look at the techniques, how it's built, to sort of, you know, and also analyse the timber. So where does the timber come from? To see. So it's not just the sort of cargo, and this is the difference between, I guess, the ethical archaeologists and the treasure hunters. The treasure hunters really aren't all that interested in anything that's not of great monetary value, like the hull remains. They'll leave them, and I have an example that I'll talk a bit about later. So some of the ships that have been excavated in China and further in the region I'll look at, and I apologise for the pronunciation, the Yangzhou shipwreck excavation was one of the first excavations in 1974. And Shinan shipwreck in Korea, the Chinese worked with the Koreans on that for quite a lengthy period. The Baijiao shipwreck, which is something I got involved in when I was helping the Chinese team in the 1990s. Nanai #1 shipwreck, a very, very important site. We'll have a little bit of a look at that. And the Nanao #1 shipwreck, later site, the Ming Dynasty site. So this training that I got involved was the 1990s, and we went to Dinghai in Fujian province and worked with the team there. And as part of that project of teaching, building capacity, we worked on this 12th century Baijiao #1 shipwreck. Many hull remains prior to about the 13th century that have been found are not Chinese ships. Really, the earliest Chinese ships are from about the 13th century. So it indicates that many other nationals were involved in their ships, and the sailors and the people that were involved in those ships too were from these other countries. There's some, but only a sparse amount of information in history about who was sailing these ships. So that's, we can look at sort of the remains, the personal possessions on board, and that will give us a clue to who is travelling aboard. We can only really do that if we're recording thoroughly, methodically, what is the cargo and what is the personal possessions. And this is something that Bass has really emphasised when he started his work as a pioneer, and many people have now followed on with that. So now the Chinese archaeologists and conservators, I don't know how many there are now. They've been doing a lot of training, and maybe 60 people upwards now involved in maritime archaeology in China from many of the provinces, I think. As I said, I think they're world leaders in this area now. This is a picture of the Yangzhou Song Dynasty vessel, and this is really typifies what is a Chinese hull construction with these across bulkheads. They were thought to be watertight bulkheads, a bit like what you hear about the Titanic. You know, the Titanic had watertight bulkheads, but the iceberg split, you know, the hull in 3 or 4 of the compartments, and it couldn't survive that, so it went down. So these just seem to be a bit like that, except they have at the bottom a hole for the water to run through. So they're actually not watertight. There's some archaeologists that say that, well, maybe they will put a bung in there at different times to stop the water. It's still an area of conjecture. but they're shell first, and shipwreck archaeologists love talking about shell first construction or frame construction. These are shell first, so it's the outside hull that's put in, and maybe there's three layers of planks. These days we put paint, but say the British 19th century ships, they would have their timber vessels, and they would put a layer of zinc to stop zinc or a copper alloy to stop the sort of corrosion and stop things from growing and attaching to the outside hull and slowing down the vessel. Also, they were sacrificial too, so they might hit something and a bit of the outside layer would come off, but no great loss. You know, we still have 2 more layers and we can keep going. But this is some of the typical characteristics of Chinese vessels. And as I said, really there's not much has been found before this vessel. This is one of the earliest excavations that was carried out in the 1970s. It was also, like it says, carrying a quantity of Southeast Asian spices. So it was involved in the trade, not just in sort of between Asia, between Korea and China. It was carrying stuff that they'd been collecting in Southeast Asia, as well as copper coins. Quite a few of these vessels, particularly the Chinese vessels, were carrying huge quantities of coins. Sometimes millions of coins were being carried. This is the remains of the Shinan shipwreck that was excavated in Korea, one of the first excavations that the Koreans and the Chinese got together on in the 1970s. And they've pieced together the timber remains, and now they can show that this vessel is from the Fujian province. It was carrying a huge quantity, over 20,000 ceramics from various kilns in China. And one of the things that still amazes me is that shipwreck material can be such you can see it's almost like you've gone to the shop and bought it. It's of such good quality. And I'm sorry, you know, I know we have 2 prominent land archaeologists here, and the amount of the shards you can get from land archaeology are just as important, but you tend to be broken pieces. It's because in underwater, maybe a site is not interfered with like on land. On land, it's, you know, it's maybe every few years it's interfered with. 2,000, 3,000 year old shipwreck can be sealed with the coral, sand, and so everything that's there can be sealed. The best environment for shipwreck preservation is in the Baltic. Is, you know, deep, dark, you know, no oxygen, no light, no swell, maybe no current. And they've recently found in the Black Sea virtually intact Roman, Greek ships, 2,500 year old, intact, still with the rudder and the mast there. And I would never say you could never get that out here, but I'm pretty sure you'll never get that out here. I mean, probably the closest thing you could come is the Nanhai number 1, which is pretty intact, but not like you'd find in the Baltic. And if you look online, Black Sea, John Adams, who's done this work there, you'll see what he's found. Fantastic. So another site that I'll just touch on is the Nanhai number 1, found in 1987, and from the southern sort of Song Dynasty. It was, I think, 15 miles off the coast of Hailing, down about 200 kilometres sort of south of Hong Kong. And the National Museum of China carried out a number of excavations on that, and we're finding huge quantities of Song Dynasty, and you can see an example of it here, some of the ceramics that they were recovering. it's a vessel about 30 metres long, over 30 metres long, 7, 8 metres wide, and 4 to 5 metres deep. Just to sort of digress a little bit before we get back to Nanhai number 1, these shipwrecks, the very couple that I've sort of talked about, and the others that other scholars have looked at, and the research that they've been able to come up with seems to suggest, and there's historical sources that also talk about this, that these ships were involved in these 4 oceans sort of trade, this navigation of the North Ocean, East Ocean, South Ocean and West Ocean. And this is pre-contact, so sort of 16th century. For hundreds of years, it was sort of set up and was developing, was running before the foreigners got here. So going back to the Nanhai number 1, such was the state of preservation, and such was I guess the issues to do with the management and the excavation of the site, being way out to sea. How do you protect it? You have a guard on sort of duty 24 hours because of potential looting, and also for to get the material before it doesn't, now that we've opened up the site, we don't want it to sort of start sort of eroding, corroding any further. So they got enough money to actually put a huge shipping container over the whole site and raise it, a mammoth undertaking. There's been other sites that have had similar sort of process, like the Mary Rose in the UK, the Vasa, but this would probably be bigger than that. And then they put this into a shipping container, and then they took it out of the sea and into the Crystal Palace, the Nanhai number 1, or the Guangdong Maritime Silk Road Museum. So this museum was purposely built on Hailing Island to house Nanhai number 1. And the large area is where they brought the ship in the shipping container close to the beach, and then they laid a railway track, and then they tracked the shipping container with the vessel inside along into the beach, into sort of Olympic-sized swimming pool, in effect, in this little museum. I think the museum cost about 2 billion yuan, or RMB. A huge undertaking, and it really is a fascinating sight to see, as we'll show a couple of photographs. There's just another illustration of it here. There's a huge number of tourist attractions that are built up around it too. So now, back then, this is not long after it had been set up in 2000 and when we were then in 2010, 2009. But now there's tourists all over the place that the Nanhai is sort of as a help become a catalyst for. But this is the shipping, or the Olympic swimming pool, Olympic-sized swimming pool with the vessel inside it. What they wanted to do was actually showcase an underwater excavation inside a museum. But they didn't have the waters like we do in Micronesia. They didn't have crystal clear blue waters that people could go up to the glass and watch archaeologists do the work. They had this container full of mud. So you start digging, and you can imagine the mud just coming out everywhere. So that was part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that this site was deteriorating. They brought it into a new environment. So we actually, as underwater archaeologists, we're very conscious of the environment and studying a site in context with the environment, and doing sort of a whole series of measures about corrosion, degradation, and what's eating it, what could be causing it to be degrading, bringing it into a new environment that was causing this degradation. So they changed their attitude, changed their mind, and did a land archaeological dig on the site. This is a model inside the museum that is said to be what the Nanhai No. 1 shipwreck looked like. A small trading vessel. You can imagine the hull being chock-a-block full of maybe 60,000 to 100,000 ceramics. So there's no room for to have a nice cabin to go and sleep in. The crew would have been sleeping on deck. Maybe the captain had an enclosure, maybe not. But the cargo was totally, took up the hull, and a number of sites that are around the world, especially in the Asia Pacific region, have sunk, not near a reef or the coast, probably because they're overloaded. So this is an excavation now of, this is 2014, I think, when they first started doing, they started doing the land archaeological dig on the site in 2011. And they've been doing that seasonal work, just like a land archaeological excavation on the site now, and a series of pictures of it here. So this is back in 2014. So you just dig layer by layer, looking at the stratigraphy. Maybe there's no stratigraphy to help. In dating maritime archaeological sites, we don't have much stratigraphy to help us in dating and in looking at the environment. We use the styles, the patterns, the shapes, the seriation of the artefacts to help date material, and the analysis of the timber. So this is now in 2015-16. You can see the watertight bulkheads, these bulkheads that I showed you in the previous vessel, and you can see how those in between there is just full of white Song Dynasty plates and bowls and dishes. So they were stacked. They probably would have had some sort of dunnage, some sort of material to help cushion, any vibration, any sort of thumping and banging that would have gone on with the ship as it's going through the water. So they were tightly packed to try and stop that. And this is how they found it and excavating it. They excavate for a few hours. Because the timber is then starting to dry out, they'll stop and spray the timber to keep it wet. Very important not to let anything from an underwater site to dry out, particularly timber. You know what it's like if you let timber or organic material dry out, it'll shrink and crack and fall apart. And this is what they're trying to stop on Nanhai No. 1. So this is some of the artefacts that have come from it. This is what we call a concretion of the artefacts with a nice intact Song Dynasty. Here's some of the other, potentially 60,000 to 100,000 ceramics from these various kilns. Quite a few of them are from Fujian province. So it's probably a vessel that's come from there. And some of the artefacts suggest with the sort of Islamic sort of type pattern to it, that it was bound for the Middle East. Some of more of the artifacts, some of the more of the ceramics. And like the first picture I put up, the necklace, the gold necklace, a few gold pieces too. And this is part of a ship's anchor. This is the stone part, highlighted in yellow there, for an anchor that's timber. The rest of the anchor is timber. This is called the stock. And the stock allows and manoeuvres when the anchor is dropped to make sure the anchor falls over. I don't know if I want to use this pointer, I might change it. But the idea is to for the anchor to fall over, and then for the flukes or those arms that are going like that to dig in that's what holds the ship. And then when the anchor it wants to be raised, you pull on the anchor, and then the stock pushes the anchor, helps to lever the anchor out of the sand. And the Chinese seem to have the stock down lower, which is probably more efficient than the Western style stock anchors that have a stock up near the sort of end of the shaft where the chain or the rope would have been attached. Now I bring this in because I'll show you something that we've recovered from Hong Kong. The 17th century, from Wanli period of the Ming Dynasty, now #1 shipwreck, a couple of hundred miles north of Hong Kong. And this material is on display at the Hong Kong Maritime Museum, and there's been a few displays of this in Hong Kong over the years. Seemed to be one of the 10 most spectacular sites with over 20,000 ceramics from the Wanli period. I just want to move on to some other sites and just to highlight again in the Asia Pacific how ceramics, the porcelain, and these are Chinese, or not Chinese, these are Korean porcelain from a Korean vessel from the Goryeo dynasty in the 12th century. And you can see the sort of number of artifacts there. It's a Korean vessel that was involved in the trade in the Korean sort of coast. Korea is probably almost as well placed and well resourced as China in terms of maritime archaeology. They have dedicated 3 boats. This is their largest boat and a small one. But they have a staff of about 40 people. They have a national research institute. And they're doing some really terrific work. And as I said, well placed, not just for the region, but in the world. They've been working, as I said, from the Shinan wreck back to the 1970s. So they're well placed for maritime archaeology in this region. So I have a small film that I just wanted to show to give my voice a rest, and you can have a change of voice. A small film that the Koreans have done on their... Can't see. Thank you. So you can see how well the Koreans are doing and the type of material they're carrying, they're finding on their sites. This site, I'm not sure which site that they're working on here, but the Shinan site that they worked with the Chinese back in 1974, and the T and the Goryeo one with the Celadon, they found wooden tablets on the Shinan site that they found over 400 of these tablets. And in the Chinese text on them, they were talking about, or they inscribed with the date of when this cargo was being carried. So that the date actually was just the day and a month, wasn't the year. But they knew from other sources that it was, I think, 1323. So they've actually got a very specific date for the Shinan ship. The Taijian ship, the tablets aren't as sort of that specific. It talks about the trade, but not providing a date for the ship. I want to just talk a bit more about some of the other sites and some of the ceramics. This is the Belton Ship. Some of you may know of it. It's one that's been implemented using, I guess, commercial and an unethical approach, in that they were recovering it and selling the material, which is not what we, as archaeologists, condone, and we're trying to stop that through the UNESCO convention and so on. But this is a model of an Arab ship, one of the first of its type found in this sort of China trade. They have a date. This date of 826 was scratched on one of the bowls. So it's come after 826, so maybe 5, 10, 20 years, maybe after. So they have a fairly good date for when the ship coming out of further north, Yangzhou. Some of the material that they've found on this, the Changchao ware, I think close to 40,000 of these Changchao ware, and the type of pattern on it is looks like it was, ordered by people from the Middle East. And other types of material they found on it. They found probably some of the first intact blue and white from the 9th century that was there. 2 or 3 pieces of intact blue and white. Some nice gold material, a cup and a few other things. These ewers and vase. Some of this material was looted before the excavation. When they were doing the excavation, they went to the villages and they got, I don't know how they got the material back, but they got it back. And what's happened is that it was a commercial job, but the Michael Flecker, who's another Australian, doing the excavation, from Sydney, not Sydney, I'm sorry, he lives in Singapore, and has done a number of excavations on Chinese and other types of ships in the Asia region. There was an arrangement for the material to be sold, but they, through Michael and his company, persuaded that the collection should all stay together. And the Singapore government bought it for something like $30 million. And when I saw it in 2010, I went to a conference about this. There was a conference about should we do commercial meaning, should we allow treasure hunting or should we not? This was where it was on display in Singapore. It's now on display, some of it is on display at Sentosa Island, big tourist resort. It's on display with the replica. They've actually made a replica of the vessel and sailed it from Oman to Singapore. So the vessel itself is on display. They found from the little bit of archaeology they did, and here again this is where we digress from archaeology, because they just concentrated on getting the ceramics up. They actually left a lot of the ship structure, and they actually didn't record much of it. They recorded enough to show that it was stitched. Wasn't nailed, wasn't doweled, it was actually stitched. The planks were together and then it was stitched together. So this was an Indian or an Arabic type. They found the timber analysis was from Africa. So when they did the reconstruction, they actually did it just like that. They got timber from Africa, they stitched it, they got people from Oman to do it, and then they sailed it out here, and now it's on display. It's, as I said, it's not seen as an ethical approach to it, but at least the collection is now together, and there's lots of controversy about the site because of how it was done. The exhibition was going to be put on in Washington. It was stopped by archaeologists, and now I think the exhibition is, I don't know if it's going anywhere. I don't think I'm letting the cat out of the bag when I say that. Actually, it was people wanted to come to Hong Kong, into a museum here in Hong Kong, but the museum refused to sort of take it. And so it went to Singapore. Some of the other sites in the region, and there are many sites outside of China that are really quite important, interesting. Kublai Khan's fleets that were invading Japan, and you can see the number of ships. 4,000 ships were involved in the 1281 and the number of soldiers. The Japanese repulsed them, but then a number of the ships were lost in these divine winds, the typhoon that came and hit the area. And now some of the Japanese archaeologists slowly, they've been working on it for a number of years, but the Japanese program in maritime archaeology is nothing like China or Korea. A small group of very enthusiastic and good and very proficient, competent archaeologists working at universities and museums, but they don't have a central program where they're working on maritime archaeology. And there are a number of ships. These I've just illustrated a couple for various reasons. The Butuan ships in the Philippines date back to the 4th century. And you can see the sort of type of construction technique that's been used, and replicas have been made of the vessels. And these are probably small vessels that were in between and weren't international vessels. They were just working in the region in the Philippines, in the islands. And I just have a few quotes of why shipwreck archaeologists are sort of wrapped up in ships and shipwrecks. And here's one or two of them I'll just read out. Ships have been the largest and most complex objects produced in most societies before the Industrial Revolution. You know, most cities, ports and capitals were established on the coast. Really, the ships are, for thousands of years, have been very significant, and they have a great social impact. Ships and seafaring, are built up. A specialised group of seafaring people and society have developed in communities and port cities with its own peculiar customs and conventions. So that's some of the reasons why many archaeologists, underwater archaeologists, maritime archaeologists, are still involved in shipwreck archaeology. And this is a site, this is not a shipwreck site. I'm wanting to just get away from shipwrecks a little bit to show you how there's some valuable, really interesting sites. This is a site in Yangzhou in China. This is the White Crane Ridge. This is actually escalators down to the bed of the river, viewing platform of inscriptions in the bottom of the Yangtze that used to dry out before the Three Gorges Dam was there. So these are now 40 metres underwater. So there are inscriptions of crane, poems, of good harvest that date back to the Tang Dynasty. So you're not far from the site. You can probably go there on your holidays one time and take the elevator escalator down, look out the platform and see the inscriptions. I'd like to see it sometime. This is another site that's really quite interesting, and it's just one example of many other types of underwater cultural heritage sites that are significant around the world and in this region in particular. Just move into Hong Kong a little bit, and there's been a little bit of work, and this is how I got involved in this area, working in Hong Kong. There was a Ming Dynasty shipwreck that's named in the High Island Reservoir. Before reservoir, it was there, maybe on this trade up from Southeast Asia, because it had a range of ceramics from Ming Dynasty to Southeast Asian pottery, and it was saved before. Well, it wasn't really saved much. It was excavated. Some of the timber, some of the ceramics, I think in the History Museum. The other site there that I have an example of is some pottery from the Ming Dynasty site of Penny's Bay, where Disneyland is. So there's some of the pottery, some of the Ming Dynasty. There's pottery maybe is associated with pirates, or not pirate, but illegal trade of the pottery during the time that they banned the trade. One of the things that commercial treasure hunters say, well, you've got so many examples of these coins or ceramics, why don't you sell some of them? This is a really nice way of showing the whole, putting them all on display. This is on a wall. This is in the Heritage Discovery Centre in Kowloon Park, if you want to go and have a look at it. A really nice way of displaying. And do I have internet? Yeah, I can click on here. I wanted to show you this site too. This is another non-shipwreck site. This is a big lithic core. This is a core of where ancient people would have been knocking off flakes and using for making stone tools. We don't have? It's okay. It doesn't work. Okay. I've done a 3D photogrammetry view of this, but you can see, you can get an idea. You can see areas in the grey areas on this core where the flakes have come off. So maybe it dates back to sort of 7,000 years. It wasn't found by me. I knew about it from another archaeologist that worked in the area. I went looking in the water because I was, what's happened? What's happened in a lot of archaeology here in the past, archaeologists that do a lot of work around the coast, but they come to the water and they stop. You just go into the water maybe 5 feet or 10 feet or 5 meters, and you can find all sorts of wonderful things, like you can find this lithic core here. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just need to, yeah, and then click on it. So thank you. So it's an underwater site. Here it was high and dry when we went back to see it. So I just met there with some colleagues for the Hong Kong Underwater Heritage Group and took a series of photographs and then put them into a program. You can see the scale. That's every black is a centimetre, so that's what, about 10 centimetres. You can see a flake that we've just picked up and put on there, but you can see where areas where they've flaked off these lithics. And they'd flake them off and maybe leave them, and others they would pick up and take off and they would make tools out of. Sometimes it's a bit hard to, let me just see if I can. You can see all sorts of flakes on the sea, on the rocks. You can see there a nice place where they've flaked off something. Anyway, it's a rock about this diameter, sits up about a metre high. Thank you for organising that. The reason I came to Hong Kong was because of they have legislation, environmental impact assessment legislation, where any offshore development, like a wind farm or a cable or something that's, here's Hong Kong, and you can see some of the many cables that come out of Hong Kong. Every one of those we need to investigate to see beforehand, to see if the cable or the pipeline is going to impact any underwater archaeological site. So I come here and I look at the geophysical data, look at sort of the side scan sonar trace, I look at the sub-bottom material to see if I can see any archaeological site. Another archaeologist here, Sarah Heaver, has done much more than me. I've only just been here for 15 years or so, but 180 of these, we've really only found probably one site, which we think is the Tamar, where some of us think it's pretty well is the Tamar. The government's going through another review of that right at the moment to sort of look at whether it is the Tamar, the British Navy ship. But one of the things that there's limitations in this. So this is Town Island. This is where we've done our excavation of some ceramics in the bay there, in this little bay. And that purple pinkish sort of area is where the geophysical side scan sonar have done work on. And so they've scanned the seabed, but they didn't see anything like the ceramics. And we found 300 or 400 of the ceramic bowls and plates and dishes that were there. So really this is not the way to sort of find underwater archaeological sites like many of the sites are in Hong Kong, like the areas of ceramic scatters. Good for finding shipwrecks, not so good for finding stuff below the surface, because sub-bottom profiling can be done, and we've looked at that and tried to probe. It's not so easy, but we also look at that. The best way is how we've done the work, and I'll talk a bit about that now, is setting up this training program and a group. So we've done training of about 70, 80 Hong Kong divers, and it's only a very small percentage of potentially 70,000 Hong Kong divers, and there's some of them here. We run a program called the Nautical Archaeology Society Training Program out of Britain, and we have a license to do that here, and it means that we have pairs of eyes that when they go diving, they're a bit more aware of what to look for, and also that they don't just go and pick the stuff up. They follow the laws of Hong Kong, because there are laws of Hong Kong related to this. But we've set up from that training from the first group, Hong Kong Underwater Heritage Group, and Rick is here as one of the founding members here. It's a website that we have in which we put material on. One of the first things we did was trying to look at sort out a database for the sites. So under the license from the Antiquities Authority, we conducted a limited sort of number of surveys and excavations in that sort of pinky area in the Sai Kung area. The area where there's least sort of traffic, marine traffic, and a bit more visibility. And we went there, we talked to people, we did a lot of historical work, and we developed a sort of database of about 280 sites in Hong Kong. So this is on the website now that you can go and have a look at. You can, HKUHG website, you can click on one of those blue flags, green flags, and you can bring up some information about the site. If we know it, we'll put it on there. So this is a database that we've actually got from the UK Hydrographic Office, and we've supplemented that with our own research, historical research, and our oral histories. And it's not just shipwrecks, but it's any type of obstruction. These sites are from the UK Hydrographic Office are obstructions for navigation. They put them on this database, they call it the wrecks database, but they may not be wrecks, they're obstructions for navigation. So the Hydrographic Office here, the Marine Office here, has checked out some of them, found that they're not shipwrecks, and we've checked out some of them too, and we're still checking out some of them. One of the projects we have in mind is to look at World War II and the US Navy sites in the next few weeks, or next few months. We've completed 2 site surveys a few years ago. We looked at a ceramic scatter site in that Town Island area, in the Sai Kung area, and we looked at a shipwreck site. And we wanted to produce a range of things to sort of highlight the value and the range of types of sites that were in Hong Kong waters. So we produced this website, which we have ongoing. The divers that we trained, a small group, actually did all the work necessary, all the conservation work. Anything that comes out of the water needs conservation. So we did that over 1 to 2 years of washing the ceramics, cleaning them. We did this from the whole survey right through to sort of writing the brochures, reports, and a small journal article for an international journal. The other type of site that we did and produced this site plan for is a modern type of site, but it shows what we can do in recording. This is a fairly good sort of site plan from a group that they're engineers, they're dive instructors. They were able to produce something that is as good as any sort of archaeological team can do. And we produced the book that we call Treasures of the Deep, with this picture of the Queen Elizabeth that's in the, where is it? It's under one of the dockyards, Stonecutters Bay area. It was going to be sort of made into a university, caught fire and then sank, and has been now reclaimed. So that's on the front cover of the book that we have. We went on and went back to the town island and did a more thorough survey, although still just on the surface. We didn't really have the facilities to do excavation, but we recovered about 350 artefacts related to mainly the Qing, and Mick Ather here did a lot of work on analysing and identifying the ceramics and helping us to put together the report. But you can see over there how we would sort of do a trench, just the same way you would do it in land archaeology, and record the exact sort of location for the artefacts before they're recovered, and then go through the conservation, go through the identification, photographing them, and producing the report. With those divers that we've been able to sort of train, they've become more enthusiastic and part of the team, and they've helped us give us information about more sites. This is a cannon site off of Basalt Island, where 2 cannon were found, and we've recovered both of those now in association with the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. And we found, just by pure chance, this well, I think Song Dynasty anchor stock. This is on the seabed in about 5 metres of water on the bottom of High Island, not far from Town Island where we were. We just went looking around, looking for other sites that might have ceramics, and really it was a bad spot to go diving. But we found this anchor stock there. It's now been treated by Paul Harrison at the Maritime Museum and been put on display, and is on display now at the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. I put this illustration of an anchor. This is a replica or a modern reconstruction of an anchor from the Yuan dynasty. This is in the Kyushu Museum in Japan, and the stone part of it, the stock part, is the only original. The wood is a new replica, but it gives you an idea of what the anchor would have looked like. But the stock is actually in that Yuan, in that Japanese one, which is a Chinese, bigger Chinese vessels. It's in 2 pieces. It's nothing like the stock we have from High Island, or the one you see at Nanhai No. 1 Museum. So we collaborate a lot. The Hong Kong Underwater Heritage Group collaborates a lot with the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. They have a very keen director who's interested in maritime archaeology. I think can play an important role in the museum's program objectives in raising the sort of awareness about maritime history. Also has a connection with a good community group, the Hong Kong Underwater Heritage Group. So we produced a proposal about how we could further develop maritime archaeology in Hong Kong. I worked with the Maritime Museum and developed this sort of phase approach to how we could conduct a program. We've sent this off to the authorities, but had little feedback, unfortunately. But I guess the idea is to build up a database of sites, to start to ID sites that could be of significance, to maybe do some excavation in the second phase. I would love to have 1 or 2 local people here that could read and write Cantonese, Chinese, and be the next maritime archaeologist for Hong Kong, be involved with the China team conducting programs in China and Korea. I think it'd be, I'd love it, and I think people here or people that would be doing it would love it too. The Hong Kong Maritime Museum is certainly keen to assist in that, and unfortunately haven't got any feedback, or much feedback from the government authorities. The Hong Kong Maritime Museum is also the venue for the 3rd Asia Pacific Conference in Maritime Archaeology, Underwater Cultural Heritage, And some of the CUHK interns can be seen there in this sort of venue we had there in November last year. The next conference is in Taiwan in 2020, in about March 2020. But we had about 120 people from about 30 countries come and talk about some wonderful things that are happening, not just in this region, but elsewhere in maritime archaeology. Just to finish off, a couple of more slides, and I hope I haven't sort of bored you too much, and I could answer some questions. This is a type of site that I'm working on in the Pacific region. These are traditional fish weirs in a place called Yap in Micronesia. So these arrow-shaped, this big one here is about 80 metres long. So they're tidal weirs. They're now, you can see the water's gone out. When the water comes in, fish come in. And then when the water's starting to go out, fish are swimming along the edge of the coast, and they come up against that rock shaft, that long shaft that goes out to the trap. So that directs the fish into the trap. And then the fish are sort of mooching and sort of eating, and then all of a sudden the tide's gone and they're trapped. So there's about 700 to 800 of these around this one island, or 3 islands in Yap. It's something that I'm quite interested in. There's similar types in Penghu in Taiwan, a group of islands between China, mainland China and Taiwan. And with the Austronesian migration out of Taiwan, there's similar sort of ones in Philippines, there's similar ones in Kiribati. So maybe it has a connection with the Austronesian migration out of Taiwan. It's something that I'd like to explore. People in Penghu, they have a dedicated museum to their ones. They invite people to come and stay for 6 to 8 days, and they help to rebuild the fish weirs. They learn about conservation, they learn about the environment, they learn about the spiritual nature of these fish weirs. And the same happens in Yap. They're not quite as sort of developed in terms of the tourism that's related to the fish weirs. That's something that I'm wanting to push in Yap. Some of the other sites in Micronesia, this is a stone city called Nan Madol in Pohnpei, about 1,500 years old. You can see this little person there who's not small, it's 5-6 foot. So you can see up the top of the rocks maybe 10 tons. It's still intact, 10-15 metres high. So this is an underwater cultural heritage site. It's in the water, as you can see. It's about 90 islets. It's a ritual city. It's a sort of a city for the elite and for the priests at the time. It's now not used. It's now beyond the World Heritage List. Like these other maritime archaeological sites, the Bikini Atoll shipwrecks, which were used in testing for what happens when you blow up a ship with an atomic bomb. This is what the Americans wanted to do at that time, and they dropped hundreds of tons of 50 or 60 mega explosions, and now they have cleaned up an area in the Marshall Islands where Bikini is, and they've encased it in concrete, but it's leaking. So the radioactivity is actually leaking out of there, leaking into the Pacific. And who knows where it's going to go and when it's going to stop. Another really nice, interesting site is the Yapese Palau stone money. These are round discs of about 3-4 metres in diameter. Some are only a few inches in diameter. And this is another really interesting maritime site and World Heritage that's being nominated. They quarried the stone in Palau and then transported the stone to Yap. And there's about 10,000 of these stone in the stone money banks traditional meeting houses in Yap. There's also about 3,500 World War II shipwrecks in the Pacific, and about 330 of these are oil tankers, with perhaps a potential for massive oil pollution, which is being investigated now with some sites. And I also worked on these sites where I did my PhD in Chuk on these sites. And they're not sites that are just related to the Americans and the Japanese, but they're important sites to research for local people. How did the war impact local people? You can research, and this is what I did, research these and come to grips with more about how they value the World War II material, these sites, and how they use these sites. So this is one shipwreck in Micronesia, the Fujikamaru. So just to conclude, maritime archaeology has a huge potential, I think, in Asia Pacific, as it does around the world, for all sorts of things. If we just consider shipwrecks, the United Nations or UNESCO has stated that there may be 3 million shipwrecks around the world, and I don't know how many have been found, maybe 10,000 of them. With technology now we can dive to the depths of anywhere around the world and recover material. So there's a huge potential with that. There's still treasure hunting that goes on. It's not so bad. It still happens. And there's many more ethical archaeologists. The thing is that local people will see if there's money involved. Why shouldn't they get a couple of $100 when all they earn for a whole year is a couple of $100? If they recover a Chinese plate and sell it to someone who might set up their family for a year. So that's one of the issues. That's something the treasure hunters say. We should get in there quick. We can do this quickly. Governments are so slow, you can't do it. But governments could do it if they got their act together. The other thing that's happening now in the Asia-Pacific region is that World War II sites are being salvaged and being hit by, said to be Chinese salvages for the pre-atomic age metals. So these are metals on the ships that is sunk before the atomic bombs were dropped. So this is metal that can be reused and reused in medicine and other types of tools and equipment. And there's actually huge money, there's big money in this now, billions of dollars in recovering these. So it's not just Chinese ceramics, it's World War II stuff that's now being hit hard. And what's happening, they're doing it just like what happened with the Titanic and the Texan. These are graveyards, and they're going in, they're bulldozing these sites, and not worrying about the fact that there's human remains there. China is now well established in maritime archaeology, with staff and resources, and as I said, is a world leader in this area. Korea as well. Some of the other countries not so. The UNESCO run training programs up until a couple of years ago, and there are some countries that still do some training programs around the world, not so much in Asia Pacific. The UNESCO Convention is a very important tool in bringing people together, bringing countries together. Only Cambodia and the Federated States of Micronesia have ratified it. If a few more countries got together, they could then go to the Paris meetings too and badger those in Paris and say, look, the centre of the cultural heritage world is not in Europe, it's also out in the Pacific. There are other types of sites than shipwrecks that are important. So I think that's one of the things. And also they could go there and talk about things that are really important to them, like climate change. They could use these as forums for pressing issues and how sites, maritime sites can help inform about climate change. The fish weirs, maybe local people were adapting to the climate change and that years ago. So more studies in that should be done. Hong Kong has not done a whole of territory underwater cultural heritage site survey like they've done in land archaeology, like they've done in built heritage. like they've done in intangible heritage. Why? Why? Yeah, why? We've tried to do it as a group of volunteers, half a dozen volunteers, but it's not, we can't never, I'm the only one that works in the field. I'm not here. Everyone else has got a job. It can't be left to just a group of volunteers. They're very keen to work, and the Maritime Museum is a keen partner. They'll actually put money into a program. They've said to the government, we'll do this, but the government sort of, so there's a big bridge to cross there. And then we have the community, we have some interest here, and I hope we can keep on generating interest for the Chinese university and maybe have one or two people that will go into maritime archaeology in terms of as a profession. And there's, it's not just all about an academic interest. There's a community involvement, community interest. It's not all about history and archaeology. It can be environment and related issues, intangible heritage. So the field is broad. It's not just a academic pursuit of recovering material, putting in a museum, which is a benefit and value. But the maritime archaeologists can be involved in many interesting areas, and you get to travel and meet interesting people and look at interesting sites. So I'd like to sort of finish there. I've sort of gone on, and thank you very much for your listening.
So thank you so much for this very brief introduction about the underwater archaeology, and in general highlight many important issues about the sites, not just in Asia Pacific, but also in Hong Kong, China, and the world. So right now we have some time, so if any one of you have questions, you can raise your question. Anyone else?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It's very nice. And I would like to ask how to become an underwater archaeologist. Yeah, like the career path or how to get into the industry.
Perhaps I could just sort of say how I got into it. I actually didn't dive when I started this work. I did surveying. That was and I was actually a draftsman initially. Then I completed my surveying diploma, and then I got a job with the museum. And then we had a group of divers come to us and said, the first underwater group that were interested in, they wanted help mapping some sites. So that was my profession, mapping. I was doing it on land. So it just meant I should start diving, and I could then help them. So you can be a diver, you can sort of study history, some sort of allied field. Archaeology is something you should study. You could be an archaeologist and then go become a diver. So there's many different ways you can do it. But getting involved with the group here, helping with sort of projects would be really worthwhile. And I always remember even after I did my surveying and working in the museum, I got a chance to do a graduate diploma. And so I did intensive study for 1 year. And even then I didn't feel that I was really up to speed. So I volunteered to do projects. And many archaeologists in land or underwater, volunteer. They go off and, holidays, they go off to Israel or wherever, and because they see that as really interesting. And I think it's an interesting way to spend your holidays with like-minded people, in another area or country, looking at a different culture. So I think there are many different ways that could be used to get into the field. And you don't have to be a diver. Maritime archaeology, the definition of maritime is coast and sea. So a maritime archaeological site can be on the coast. It doesn't have to be underwater. So some people can't dive or don't want to dive. They can still do archaeology. It's maritime related. Whether it's archaeology, it's all just archaeology anyway. It's a specialised field, and many maritime archaeologists obviously dive, but you don't have to.
Any other question? maybe Cambodia and the place you call FSM, they ratify into the usage convention, but not other Southeast Asian countries. This is the first question. And second, why for the, maybe not the government representative, why they're not really interested in underwater archaeology in Hong Kong? Is that not that reasonable compared with the historical building?
Yeah, $60 million question, that last one. What was the first question again?
Why only Cambodia?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not sure why Cambodia. That's it's a few years ago. I know FSM, because I probably played a big role in FSM, because that's where I did my PhD, and I raised the sort of level of awareness about the value of the Shipwrecks, the Chuk Lagoon Shipwrecks. And the Chuk Lagoon Shipwrecks are leaking oil. And I know that the president has been to UNESCO and said, we want help looking after these sites, looking after the, stopping the oil. And the Japanese have gone there, so now they're just sort of developing partnerships. And reason for that is that they've taken on the convention, they've raised an awareness, and UNESCO are helping them with partnerships. So that's been one of the reasons why FSM have done it. And I also stressed, well, it shouldn't all just be about colonial or World War II sites. It should be, you can use this, you can go to Paris and say, fish weirs, other types of sites, Nair Madal, these are underwater cultural heritage sites. You can go to UNESCO and Paris meetings and say, we don't want to be marginalised in these types of sites. And I tried to push that along, and I'm trying to push that with some other countries that I'm working with in this field, to say that it's not all about shipwrecks. Many countries that people see that underwater cultural heritage is just shipwrecks, but it's not. So it's a a fair bit to do with the Chuk shipwrecks and the need and the facility, the impetus that it causes in getting sort of partnerships to help manage those sites. A few other countries in the Pacific I know, because we're pushing quite a bit. I think they might ratify over the next few years, but I don't know about the Southeast Asian countries, Cambodia. I think China, many countries, they use what the convention includes, the general principles, and then it has a series of rules. And most countries are abiding by those rules. And so they're sort of there, but they just don't want to ratify for some reason. There are a few issues to do with, even though the convention says it maintains the sovereign rights, even in a territorial sea. And one of the reasons why the US doesn't like it is because the US sort of says, well, they say any US warship wrecked anywhere in the world, it's ours, and we'll do whatever we want to do with it, even if it's in your back door in your territorial sea. And the convention says, well, that's fine, but there's still that sort of guarded response from countries about entering into it, because they say, well, the convention does say we encourage you to work with other countries, even though it's your sovereign shipwreck. So they don't, I think a few countries are like this, but some of the big, Spain, France, the big maritime countries have ratified it. In terms of your other question about why the government won't ratify, won't do a territory-wide survey, I don't know. I know that the Tamar issue, the site is causing them some concern. And I think it may be the ownership issues to do with it, opening up, I don't know, monetary issues, compensation. Maybe the area, they think the area is expensive to get into, but it's not. We've done some interesting, valuable work with, we need to have a boat. We get a little bit of money, we can do some surveys. So it doesn't cost a lot of money, it just depends on what you want to do. If we had government support, the museum would get involved, we would get sponsorship, and we could run a much more effective program. But I don't know why they don't want to take that first step. They do say, I mean, Hong Kong, you know, I don't want to get into local politics, but but I know that they do want to, you know, if China does it, we'll do it. And China is very keen about, you know, this whole area, you know, they're world leaders. And they have, you know, similar to the Borough Charter, they have you know, their own sort of rules. It abides by international guidelines. So they're doing the sort of things in an ethical manner. And I've heard they're on the verge of ratifying, but you hear this all the time. So, you know, it would be in suit with what China's doing for Hong Kong to get more involved in underwater cultural heritage management. It would, you know, fall in line with what China is doing.
Thank you, Professor. I have just a small question about, it seems that today's talk is all about the underwater shipwrecks. I used to read a magazine about National Geographic. It's about underwater city. Would you mind to give us some illustration about how to conduct underwater city excavation work, those things? Thank you.
I mentioned Namdal. I mean, it's a small stone city that's been submerged. I know of a really interesting city in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, Port Royal, that's submerged from a huge, a bit like the earthquake that was in Indonesia a month or two ago, where half the city sort of submerged. They said it was the wickedest place in the world because it was a pirate city. Now Texas A&M, Institute of Archaeology and other groups are doing some wonderful work on that. You can see the buildings, you can see the streets, paved streets. So there is some wonderful work being done on in the Middle East, not Middle East, in the Mediterranean, in the eastern part, Israel area. There's a number of submerged cities. And they've done, for 20, 30 years, they've done a lot of work. I concentrated on the shipwrecks, the ceramics, and what's in this region. I didn't sort of explore much of those other types of sites. But they're, you know, in the High Island Reservoir, in other reservoirs in China, there's submerged villages. I think it's difficult to get to some of those sites, to get the permission, the license to dive some. I know of, I'm not sure where it is in China, a village is a popular dive in the middle of China in a lake, I think. You know, I'd be guessing where it is, but it's a few hundred years old, a village. So yeah, this is an important area that could be investigated for sure, and it has been in certain areas. So Mick, you can't ask any grueling question.
Okay, one thing just strikes me about the situation locally is that the emphasis on heritage is in the land. And I think we talked about this briefly at the conference that you were chairing, that Hong Kong has been a maritime place, not just from the colonial period and the development of the city, but the sea has been central to what people did here for a very long time. So you would think that all things maritime should be very high on the agenda, but for some reason they're not. So it is a very strange anomaly. And I can't get my head around it. I've been thinking about it for quite a long time as well. But it maybe is tied in with the fact that people are very terrestrial in their mindset.
Yeah.
Most of the people involved in heritage are not people who have a connection with the sea. Even though they live by it, they travel underneath it on the MTR, over it on bridges and tunnels. But they're not people who are tuned into the sea, so maybe it needs some kind of significant change of mindset, which I think the work that you've done with the Maritime Museum, with Rick and his team, that's maybe the way to go, is to try to lead the government by the nose by demonstrating what could be done, what can be found out there. I've actually got a question as well. That's more of a rambling comment. The Town Island stuff that we were both involved in some way, that's a really interesting location for me because that is probably a boat people anchorage. And the stuff that we're finding there, or that you found there, is things that were dumped over the side that got broken over a succession of people mooring there. There were a few things that looked much older. Is there any possibility you think of going back to that site and actually doing some excavation rather than surface collection? And what do you think might be revealed if we did that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I have thought a bit about going back there and doing excavation, do some test pits. I think, yeah, it takes a bit more of an effort. You know, you need digging equipment, you need to be set up, and we need somewhere like the Maritime Museum to as a base for excavation equipment. And we have a conservator, Paul, as you know, and we have some facilities. We really do need a dedicated boat, almost not a big boat, but it does take a 2-3 times sort of leap in terms of resources that we need to do it. And I'm always conscious of doing anything like that if we're not well resourced and we can't look after it. And it suffers. The material suffers.
It's a classic example of not being a shipwreck. It's not a shipwreck site as far as you can tell.
Yeah, as far as we can tell.
It's a location that's been repeatedly used by people, potentially over centuries.
Yeah.
As they're passing through that area.
Yeah.
And materials have been deposited on the seabed.
Yeah, yeah.
It ties in with the whole point of this maritime connection of local and passing people.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of a nice,
it would be
a nice thing to kind of illustrate.
I did this talk at the conference we had, and I didn't do it very well. It was just something I was exploring, the cultural identity, and certainly, and it shows up in the countries that I have, and as on their flag, their maritime cultural identity with the canoe on their flag and the stone money, which is transported overseas. Maritime in Guam, where I'm from, they have a boat, have the sea on their flag, so they have a maritime cultural identity. Hong Kong had a flag with Chinese junks on it, but it doesn't have. It has a different flag now. But just as an example of the mindset, like you say, we don't have a mindset like a cultural identity tied with the sea. We put in a grant application a couple of years ago with the Maritime Museum. We were wanting to do. We wanted to explore maritime cultural landscape on Hong Kong Island. Look at the sort of connections, things like the names of streets, maritime buildings, maritime graves, all those. We picked out about 15 different types of sites that had a maritime identity, and that we would do a maritime cultural landscape. And we put that program, that project to Lord Wilson Heritage Trust, and we failed in getting it. But I still like that project, and it would be something nice to revive because it's on land, but we can illustrate how important the maritime connection is there. There's all these sort of things, features, sites, artifacts, Tin Hau temples, 100 Tin Hau temples. There's a maritime connection, part of the maritime cultural landscape.
And they map the former coastline as well.
Sorry?
They map the position of the former coastline. Because the Tin Hau temple was by the sea, and many now are looking out.
Yeah.
Because it is close. Okay, so thank you for the conversation. So thank you very much for attending our talk, and also thank you Professor Jefffery and the University Library. Okay, one more thing. For promotion, welcome to visit our exhibition until 10 p.m. today in the University Library. And it's also our honor because Mr. Rick Chan also provided some brochure about the Hong Kong Underwater Heritage Group. So if you are interested and somehow you want to be the maritime archaeologist, you can contact them, okay? So we also have a booklet, so maybe tonight if you visit there, if you return the questionnaire, the questionnaire for the exhibition, you may have a chance to get the booklet of our exhibition. Okay, thank you for coming.